Most people think power means speaking loudly, proving yourself, winning arguments, showing dominance, or making the world notice your presence. But real power is something completely different. Real power is silence. Not the silence of weakness, not the silence of fear, but the silence of control, the silence of wisdom. The silence of someone who no longer needs validation from the world. There was once a young man who believed that being powerful meant always having the last word. Whenever someone insulted him, he reacted immediately. Whenever someone doubted him, he argued endlessly. Whenever life became difficult, he complained loudly. He thought speaking more made him stronger, but in reality, every reaction made him weaker. One day, after losing an important friendship because of his anger, he walked alone into the mountains feeling broken and frustrated. Deep inside, he felt exhausted from fighting everyone around him. As he wandered through the hills, he saw an old monk sitting silently near a river. The monk wasn't doing anything. He simply sat there peacefully, watching the flowing water. The young man approached him and said, "Master, how can someone stay calm in a world full of rude people, fake friends, betrayal, and disrespect? If we stay silent, won't people think we are weak?" The monk smiled but said nothing. Minutes passed. The young man became irritated. "Did you hear my question?" he asked loudly. The monk slowly picked up a glass of muddy water from beside him and handed it to the young man. "Drink this," he said softly. The young man looked at the muddy water with disgust. "I can't drink this," he replied. The monk nodded and placed the glass down. A few minutes later, the dirt settled at the bottom and the water became clear naturally. The monk then said, "Your mind is exactly like this water. When you constantly react with anger, arguments, noise, and emotion, your thoughts become muddy. But when you learn silence, everything settles, and only then can you see clearly." The young man became quiet. The monk continued, "Weak people always react, powerful people observe." Those words hit him deeply. The monk looked toward the mountains and said, "Look at nature. The sun rises silently. The moon shines silently. Trees grow silently. Real power never needs to announce itself." The young man listened carefully as the monk continued speaking. "A lion does not waste time barking like dogs. A mountain does not move because of the wind. And a wise person does not argue with every fool." The young man lowered his head. He remembered how many times his anger had destroyed his peace, how many sleepless nights he spent replaying arguments in his mind, how many relationships he damaged trying to prove himself right. The monk then asked him, "Tell me, why do people speak so much?" The young man thought for a moment and replied, "Maybe because they want to be heard." The monk smiled gently. "No," he said. "Most people speak too much because they are uncomfortable with silence." Silence forces a person to face themselves. The young man felt chills hearing those words. The monk continued, "Silence reveals truth. That is why many people fear it. In silence, you discover your insecurities, fears, weaknesses, and thoughts, but you also discover your strength." The river beside them continued flowing peacefully. The monk then picked up a small stone and threw it into the water. Ripples spread everywhere. "This is what happens when you react emotionally to every situation," he explained. "Your peace disappears." Then he pointed toward the still water after the ripples faded. But silence restores clarity. The young man sat quietly, absorbing every word. For the first time in years, he stopped trying to defend himself and simply listened. The monk then told him a story. Years ago, there was a king who had a servant known for his wisdom. One day, another servant insulted him publicly in front of everyone. But instead of reacting, the wise servant smiled and walked away. Later, the king asked him, "Why didn't you defend yourself?" The servant replied, "If someone offers you a gift and you refuse to accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" The king answered, "To the person who offered it." The servant smiled and said, "Exactly, I refuse to accept his insults." The young man's eyes widened. The monk then said something unforgettable. "Not every battle deserves your energy. Sometimes silence is the strongest reply." The young man slowly realized that most of his suffering came not from people, but from his reactions to people. The monk continued, "The world teaches people to speak louder, but wisdom teaches people to become calmer. A person who cannot control their tongue cannot control their life." The young man asked softly, "But what if people misunderstand our silence?" The monk replied, "Let them." Then he added, "You waste too much energy trying to control how others see you. Real peace begins when you stop explaining yourself to everyone." The wind moved gently through the trees as the monk continued speaking. Some people will hate you no matter how kind you are. Some will judge you no matter what you do. Some will misunderstand you because they only understand their own level of thinking. So why destroy your peace trying to convince everyone? The young man felt as though years of frustration were finally leaving his heart. The monk then explained, silence is not empty, it is full of answers. When you stay silent, you observe more, you think more clearly, you avoid unnecessary conflict, you protect your energy, and most importantly, you stop giving other people control over your emotions. The young man realized he had spent his entire life allowing others to control his mood. One insult ruined his day. One criticism destroyed his confidence. One rejection made him feel worthless. The monk looked directly into his eyes and said, "The person who angers you controls you." Those words changed something deep inside him. The monk continued, "When someone insults you and you instantly react, they become your master because they can control your emotions whenever they want. But when you stay calm, you remain powerful." The young man remembered every argument he ever regretted, every emotional reaction that created more pain, every moment he lost peace trying to win meaningless battles. The monk then stood up slowly and pointed toward the river again. "Do you know why deep water appears calm?" he asked. The young man shook his head. The monk answered, "Because depth creates silence. Shallow water makes the most noise." The young man finally understood. Truly intelligent, confident, and powerful people rarely feel the need to prove themselves constantly. Only insecure people seek attention from everyone. The monk then said, "Silence is also protection. When you reveal too much about your plans, dreams, and struggles, people interfere with your energy. Some people secretly pray for your failure. Some smile in front of you but compete behind your back. That is why wise people move quietly." The young man nodded slowly. The monk continued, "Work in silence, heal in silence, grow in silence, and let success make the noise." The young man felt goosebumps hearing those words. Hours passed as the monk shared wisdom about life. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, the monk gave the young man one final lesson. He said, "There are 3 moments when silence becomes true power. First, when you are insulted. Second, when you are angry. Third, when you are winning." The young man looked confused. The monk explained, "If you stay silent during insult, you protect your dignity. If you stay silent during anger, you protect your future. And if you stay silent during success, you protect your peace." Tears filled the young man's eyes. For years, he searched for power in loudness, dominance, and control. But now he understood something life-changing. Real power was emotional control. Real power was inner peace. Real power was silence. Before leaving, the young man asked the monk, "Master, what is the greatest benefit of silence?" The monk smiled and answered softly, "Silence teaches you who you really are." The young man bowed respectfully and left the mountains, but he was no longer the same person. Slowly, his life began changing. He stopped arguing unnecessarily. He stopped reacting to every opinion. He stopped chasing validation from people. And something surprising happened. The calmer he became, the stronger he felt. People who once manipulated him could no longer control him emotionally. Situations that once disturbed him no longer stole his peace. He learned that silence was not weakness, it was mastery. Years later, the young man became known as one of the wisest men in his village. People often asked him, "What changed your life?" And he always gave the same answer, "The day I discovered the power of silence." Friends, always remember this: not every opinion deserves your response. Not every insult deserves your attention. Not every battle deserves your energy. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is remain calm and silent. Because silence is not the absence of power, silence is power itself.